Jim, we know it's happening May at the latest next year, of course, the federal election. A lot of pieces starting to move around the chessboard, particularly for the federal government at the moment, and to a lesser extent the opposition. So what's been happening in that space as of late?
Well, good morning, Mark. Yeah, look, I think we need to think about in the next sort of 6 to 7 months, it's wide open as to what can happen. I think if you were leading the Liberal Party at the moment and Prime Minister, you're starting to be a little worried, in particular because of the rumblings, and they're quite serious rumblings around the sort of the future of the Liberal Party and the future of the leadership. I doubt whether the power brokers within the Liberal Party will want to risk a leadership spill so close to an election. And besides, there's no obvious successor in terms of having broad appeal. So that's one of the issues. But on the other hand, they've got an issue with credibility and integrity and so forth as a party in government, in particular in its alliance with the Nationals. So there's that dimension which is doing damage on an increasing scale. And to the extent that the party members, Mark, see this as due to the leader, will determine whether they are willing to gamble on changing. But like I said, I suspect not. They'll because of lack of successor. And there's a possibility that the person who's most likely to succeed may lose his seat at the next election, because that's Josh Frydenberg in a Victorian seat, which was at one time a really blue ribbon Liberal seat. But, with the redistribution that's happened, there's plenty of opportunity for an independent challenger or even the Labor Party to claw the seat from them. So you've got that happening. And then you've got the issues within the Liberal Party, which go back to the time when John Howard took over as leader in 1995 and reshaped the party over the next decade. And that reshaping has got more and more conservative, and there's a more and more narrow group of parliamentary members in the Liberal Party who are controlling what's going on, and they're not necessarily representative of the mainstream of Australia, and which is why you're getting a number of Liberal people both inside the party, the moderates, beginning to flex their muscles, and getting a number of very strongly identified Liberals running as independents because they don't believe the Liberal Party stands for what the Liberal Party originally stood for back in the when it was formed under Sir Robert Menzies. It's changed so dramatically, Mark, that various sort of more moderate people are despairing of it actually being fit for purpose.
Well, the problem you've got is, I think, with the line that the Prime Minister's trying to run here, you're not pleasing anybody, because the people that are moderate or more left in the Liberal Party are wanting to go more down that road, which you're seeing with the net zero and the climate change stuff and things in that world. And if you're of the Conservative side, you're like, well, hang on a minute, the Liberal Party doesn't really suit Conservative values either. Therefore, we're seeing a couple of those minor parties which will probably take a chunk away. You think the Liberal Democrats, UAP, possibly One Nation, and then on the other side, which is where you were coming out a minute ago, Jim, some of the independents, which may chunk away at the more moderate, more to the left of the party.
Well, yeah, there's something in what you're saying there, Mark, and in particular there are challenges from minor parties in some of the marginal seats, and in particular there's a whole slew of seats in Queensland that managed via preferences to come over the line for the Liberal National Party, and hence enabled the government to stay in power. But that may well be shifting, and the mainstream of Australia overall seems to be leaning to, shall we say, slightly more, in your terminology, leftish policies around climate change, slightly more progressive policies around climate change, planning for the future and so forth. And also to do something about the lack of integrity, the really bad and shonky behaviour of numerous politicians and across the spectrum, but many associated with the government at present, and a leader who seems not to have control of his party and who himself seems to have trouble owning up to mistakes and correcting mistakes. And I think we see that again when the Prime Minister came out and has endorsed Gladys Berejiklian to run at the federal seat, even though the issues around ICAC have not yet been resolved. And on top of that, he's gone out and personally attacked ICAC, declaring it a kangaroo court. Now, even if he believes that, that's not the statesmanlike or diplomatic way in which he gets seen to be above the fray and saying something that people can identify with. Rather, it's him reinforcing the idea that if you want to hold us to account, we're not going to agree to that because we're in charge and we don't have to account to you or anybody.
Well, I think it was a silly move, and it's a kind of a bet each way. If Gladys had left, if there was no ICAC looming, and she just said, "Look, it's time to go. I'm leaving." Whatever. Great move. Yep, grab her if you can, and put her into federal parliament. You get another 10 or 15 years. But when is ICAC going to drop? Early next year, probably, or throughout 2022. So
that's one of the issues.
That's the problem.
And the other issue is that if she runs on the federal ticket, she has to line up with the Morrison view of the world and Scott Morrison's understanding of climate change, Scott Morrison's understanding of gender politics and so forth, which, in as far as I can read, Gladys Berejiklian's performance from her past, ICAC notwithstanding, that she has progressive views on climate change. She wants a more aggressive view, policies in relation to climate change. She's sensitive to the gender equality issues and the integrity issues. And again, as I said, ICAC notwithstanding, for all intents and purposes, her value set is, I wouldn't say the opposite of Scott Morrison's, but it's certainly on a far higher plane of principles than what we've seen from a number of federal politicians, including Scott Morrison.
Well, then again, the problem is if you run too much in that run, you're running, you're basically going to run second to Labor and the Greens anyway, because so they're really in a bit of a funk. They doesn't matter what they do, they seem to be upsetting a huge chunk of the base, whether it's their base, the future or past base. So we will see where they land, but somewhere between March and May, they reckon. So
they're
a long
smart.
way to go.
Yeah, I think so, because there's a lesson there about staying in touch with the wider Australian population, and I think thus far the Liberal Party over the past at least 3-4 years has lost touch, and it may end up paying the price for that, not just in terms of loss of government, but in terms of actually imploding around after the election.
All right, plenty to see and plenty to look out for with the bunch of popcorn over the next couple of months. Jim Jose, we'll talk to you next week.
My pleasure, Mark.
2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.